At one point, I think the Chief Whip and the Deputy Chief Whip had both resigned in protest at the Prime Minister's behaviour, and then they sort of unresigned. Chris Bryant reports that they were pretty close to fisticuffs in the lobby as MPs were being manhandled through the division. I don't know what's going on, but we'll know by 11 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, Labour has been granted an urgent question in the next hour over the departure of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. She quit over an apparent security breach, but in her resignation letter, she said Liz Truss's premiership was tumultuous and accused the government of breaking key pledges. Last night also saw allegations Tory MPs were bullied into voting with the government over fracking. Transport Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan has told LBC she didn't see that happen.
I know that Mr Speaker will be looking very closely at that. It is never acceptable to try and direct a colleague like that if that is what went on, and I know that Mr Speaker did that. We are, respected as one of the great parliaments of the world because we have genuine freedom to vote as our conscience determines. It was a 3-line whip yesterday.
A former Metropolitan Police Commissioner has told LBC he fears the cost of living crisis will spark a rise in shoplifting. Lord Blair says the economic crisis will mean some people having to make very difficult decisions. But he's called on the police not to be too hard on those who are caught committing petty crimes.
People will have to be arrested, but I don't really see them being charged. I see them being cautioned and told they really can't do this. I don't want to make too many predictions, but I don't see it leading to riots in the street. I just see it as a very miserable time.
3 people have been charged with the murder of a man who was found dead near an industrial estate in Essex. Corey Alpergin, who is 43, was discovered in Loughton on Saturday. The 2 men and a teenager are also accused of kidnapping a woman. The final report from the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse is due to be published at midday. It was started in 2015 and includes 15 investigations into abuse across England and Wales dating back several decades. Protesters have sprayed orange paint over the Harrods store in Knightsbridge in London. The Just Stop Oil group says it's blocking the road there as part of its latest demonstration. Dame Judi Dench has criticised Netflix series The Crown, saying it's beginning to verge on crude sensationalism. She's called for a disclaimer to be added to each episode over the risk many viewers will think it's historical truth. Netflix says the show is fictional dramatisation. In the city a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading flat at 69.25. The pound buys just under $1.12 and €1.14. LBC weather, cloudy across much of England and Scotland with some rain at times. Bright over Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, a high of 18 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Simon Conway.
Yes, I'm looking for help with spending less on my mobile bills.
Ugh, please hold. Hey, you see the game last night, mate? Oh, mad one.
Hello?
Club card holders only. 1 club card point for every £1 spent on your Tesco mobile bill. Tesco Club Card scheme terms and conditions apply.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Three minutes after 10, a very good morning indeed to you. I was trying to watch rugby league last night. I was trying to watch Wales against the Cook Islands. I like rugby league a lot, and I don't generally tune into the news channels. I catch the 10 or the 6, keep an eye on things, as it were. Usually got Twitter buzzing away in the background, but the chaos that engulfed the Conservative Party was so complete that I felt, you had to watch it. It was unbelievable what happened last night. Now, I appreciate, I love nothing more than seeing you on Twitter or on my text in my inbox expressing how much you're looking forward to the top of the show, in the hope perhaps that we might make sense of things, or I suppose if you're coming at it from a different angle, that I might finally burst a blood vessel live on the radio. It moves me. It moves me deeply, actually. It's incredible to think how far we've come together from the days when I first sat down in front of this microphone and spoke to about 8 people, I think. But I don't share your excitement at the moment. I don't share your sort of anticipatory glee, because I'm haunted by some of the calls we didn't take yesterday. I hope that doesn't sound odd. Yesterday, we found some time to turn our attention to the cost of living crisis. We found some time to turn our attention to the question of how we've ended up in a country where 1 in 7 people are now skipping meals because they can't afford to eat. I'm haunted by Rita in Haringey, who's reduced to wearing her dead mother's clothes because the outlay necessary to refresh her wardrobe is simply beyond her. I'm haunted by the mum we spoke to, the mum of 3, who essentially has Weetabix of an evening after feeding her children, goes to college, works part-time, plays by the rules, can't afford to eat. I'm haunted by the calls we didn't take, the people that were queuing up to talk to me about having to skip meals. Children at schools who can't have school dinners because they fall between the qualification and the cost. They don't qualify for the free ones, but their parents can't afford to feed them. The shame those children feel. The tale we heard from a teacher of the boy who took advantage of a failure in the computer system that meant he could actually get lunch that day, even though when the bill finally came, his parents wouldn't be able to pay it. The honour system that temporarily failed and meant that he could actually join the queue for dinner, knowing that the money to pay for it was not actually in his account and perhaps never would be. I'm haunted by those calls, the calls we took and the calls we didn't take. So, listen, it may be on a different day. If I'd got out of bed on a different side, I'd be jumping up and down with excitement about the political skip fire that is raging in front of us. But the Conservative Party are not in opposition. The Conservative Party are not having this ludicrous internecine warfare, this inevitable and complete collapse of confidence in themselves, in Liz Truss, in each other, in everybody, during a period of peace and tranquility. It's not as if they have the luxury of stepping away from the fray in order to indulge in a little domestic dispute. The country is in turmoil. And people are suffering on a scale that is simply unconscionable in an economy that is supposed to be among the biggest in the world. It's unconscionable. It's unbelievable. It's incredible. And here's the thing. These Conservative politicians are not sitting at home or swapping messages on WhatsApp about how the hell they're going to get food into the bellies of hungry children. They're not swapping theories or proposals on how they're going to ensure that Rita in Haringey can afford some knickers and doesn't have to wear her late mother's today. They're swapping messages about their own ambitions. They're gossiping about party politics. Internal party politics. They're swapping stories about Grant Shapps and Suella Bloomin' Braverman. They are not interested in the business of government. Grant Shapps is Foreign Secretary. A man who made his fortune selling get-rich-quick schemes on the internet under several false names and then lied about it for years. That is how low we have come. That is how low we have been brought by this Conservative Party, by the post-Brexit Conservative Party. Jeremy Hunt is Chancellor of the Exchequer. He is supposed to be the solution to the problems Liz Truss has caused. A man who turned the NHS upside down and then did a lap of honour. Grant Shapps, the Spiv's Spiv, who last week was plotting to oust Liz Truss, yesterday accepted an offer to take up one of the great offices of state. An office that has been so completely debased by the last 2 occupants that it barely merits the name anymore. Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, Grant Shapps. What an honours board. What a track record. I've even confused myself actually with the with the job titles and the job descriptions. Home Secretary. James Cleverly is Foreign Secretary. I'll say that again because I can't actually believe it. James Cleverly is Foreign Secretary. Grant Shapps is Home Secretary. He succeeds Suella Braverman, who boasted gleefully of dreaming about deporting refugees, who succeeded Priti Patel, who was found by the Prime Minister's own ethics advisor to be a heinous bully, whose compensation for the person she bullied cost the taxpayer tens of thousands of pounds. So I'm not relishing the mess. I could do, because I'm okay. I'm locked into a mortgage for the next 5 years at interest rates that are barely recognisable from what you'd get if you tried to sign up for a mortgage today. My children aren't going to be going hungry anytime soon. If I need some new clothes, I can afford to pop out after the programme today and buy some. So I could, by rights, just treat British politics like a campfire. I could warm my hands on it like a lot of journalists do. I could sit around it and chew the fat and eat my tea and giggle about what an almighty mess it is. I could allow the Schadenfreude to run riot. I could get the biggest tin in the world and fill it with pound coins every time I say, I told you so. But it's awful what is happening. It's not funny. It's not to be celebrated in the way that some idiots claimed they loved Remainer-tears after they successfully voted to turn this country into the first in history to impose economic sanctions on itself. Taking pleasure in the opinions of one's, in the failures and the travails of one's political enemies is the mark of a sociopath. It's the mark of an idiot. This is one country. We are one people. This is a single population, and millions of us are struggling in ways that should simply not be happening. And what is the party of government doing? Scuffling in the lobby like delinquent school children, squabbling on social media like fishwives, resigning, resigning, talking to the media, saying one thing to the cameras and another to your colleagues. They are not interested in the people of the United Kingdom. They are not interested in the suffering of the population. They do not care about anything except their own pathetic ambitions, their machinations, their Machiavellian manoeuvres. They care not a jot about you, about me, or about anything other than jostling for position, seeking promotion, and hanging on to their seats, their salaries, and their jobs. There are exceptions. I shall play you one or two of them in the course of this morning, but they are so rare now as to be remarkable. So forgive me. Forgive me for not enjoying this. And no criticism at all of the people who are kind enough to express some sense of relish at the 10 o'clock coming around and the monologue beginning. It does get me out of bed every morning, and there is often fire in my belly. And then other days, of course, there's something rather sadder driving my thoughts and driving my words. And today is a very, very, very sad day. Because of the people who are suffering and how far they are from the thoughts of the people who are supposed to be governing, how far they are from the thoughts of Liz Truss, who came into office and decided that her top priority was to give a tax cut to people like me. To people like me. And then abandon almost every strand of that ludicrous mini-budget with barely an acknowledgement of who was responsible for it. We've mentioned Shaggy a few times in the context of modern politics, haven't we? It wasn't me. It wasn't me. She threw Kwasi Kwarteng under the bus for the crime of keeping the promises that she made. And now she's brought in two of the people that have presumably both been plotting to get rid of her in the space of the last fortnight. And they both said yes. They both said yes. Grant Shapps said yes to move in the space of 24 hours from plotting to get rid of somebody to accepting a plum job in their cabinet is the mark of a spiv, an opportunist, a man who has gone into politics in pursuit of status and importance, a man built upon pomposity, a man who made his money. And I remember talking about this years ago because I couldn't quite believe that the Conservative Party that I grew up with would even consider promoting a man who made his money flogging get-rich-quick schemes on the internet using false names. But David Cameron did. And somehow, separate from Brexit, Shapps represents that corruption of conservatism quite perfectly. The idea that there is room in any political party for a snake oil salesman, and not a rhetorical snake oil salesman, and not a figure of speech snake oil salesman, an actual snake oil salesman. So pungent was the snake oil, he wouldn't even use his own name to flog it. And now he is Home Secretary. Home Secretary. Do me a favour, seriously. And we can't get rid of them. There's no mechanism, there's no mechanic by which the people who are queuing up, the Conservative MPs who are queuing up to deride and to denigrate Liz Truss, can actually get her out of the building. It's absolutely appalling what has happened. And it's happened in large part because right-wing newspapers and right-wing commentators kept telling us that this was good, this was desirable, this was what we wanted. That David Cameron was the answer to the country's problems, that Brexit would enhance our reputation, our status and our wealth, that Theresa May was the admiral to steer the ship through choppy waters, that Boris Johnson would somehow abandon a lifetime of lying and cheating and betraying everybody in his orbit and discover some statesman-like qualities. And when that dream died, they told us that Liz Truss was the answer to our prayers. That the mini-budget was a work of conservative genius. They were doing that 4 weeks ago, not 4 years ago, not even 4 months ago, 4 weeks ago. They were praising her to the rafters. And now they're sharpening their knives and queuing up to push her out the back door. It beggars belief how far we've fallen, and I chronicle it every single day. I have the privilege of talking with you every day, and if you've been listening to this programme for the last 6 years, you will be among the least surprised people in the country. You will be among the least shocked people in the country because it has been so ploddingly predictable. Every twist, every turn, every lie, every U-turn has been telegraphed to those of us who've been paying attention and ignoring the siren lies of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph and Rupert Murdoch's son. The least surprised people in the country, you and me, and yet still utterly shaken by the scale of the mess and the dereliction of duty being displayed by the people in charge. And I still don't get it. Not fully, not completely. I can point over there at an absence of empathy. I can point over there at a pursuit of personal ambition. I can point over there at a prioritisation of greed. I can point at Brexit. Several fingers pointing at Brexit. But none of it's ever quite enough to understand how we could have fallen so far, so fast. They care not a jot about me. They care not a jot about you. And if you want the absolute, undiluted, ineluctable proof of that, have a look at what happened last night. Have a look at what happened last night. We used to laugh at Italy. Do you remember? We used to laugh at politicians in some Eastern European parliaments biting chunks out of each other, sometimes almost literally. We used to feel superior. It's probably not a healthy position to adopt. It's probably not a healthy impulse, but it's comforting. We feel superior. It could never happen here. Look at the calibre of our politicians. Look at the statesmen and women that have become household names in this country over the last decades. And now look at what we've got. James Cleverly in the Foreign Office. Grant Shapps in the Home Office. Jeremy Hunt in the Treasury. And Liz Truss in Downing Street.
O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time. Haven't asked a question yet, but it's becoming a bit of a habit. These are phone-ins of a very different flavour from the traditional ones. If you want to join in the conversation, you know the number. We'll work our way towards a question, but first we need some clarity. We need to actually catch up with what's gone on overnight. LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood joins me. I mean, I went back to the rugby, Theo.
Yes.
At which point the chief whip and the deputy chief whip had actually resigned.
Yes, and I was told yesterday afternoon, and it was confirmed to me by a source of mine in Number 10, that the chief whip had resigned.
Why? Why had they resigned at that point?
Imagine basically, it's difficult to kind of draw analogies, but it's a bit like somebody saying, Theo, you're going to do 10 till 1 and not telling you that you're the presenter anymore.
Right.
So the chief whip is in charge of party...
Don't give them ideas.
No, trust me, I think you're safe with me, James. There are others, but... Anyway... The point of the chief whip is they're in charge of party discipline. It's their job to get MPs through the voting lobbies. This was a confidence motion because Labour, as we were discussing yesterday, wanted to take control of the order paper. It would have been farcical if Labour then get to decide to bring forward legislation with a ban on fracking. Therefore, any Tory MP who was going to vote with Labour or sit on their hands and abstain, being a confidence motion, had been told by the chief whip and the deputy chief whip, you will lose the party whip. You will no longer be a Conservative MP. You will simply be an independent. Number 10, realising the scale of the rebellion, you had people like Chris Skidmore, Tracy Crouch tweeting they're not going to support it. Panic stations suddenly messaged Graham Stewart, the energy minister, on the front bench. He says, oh, actually, I'm not sure it is a confidence motion.
Well, then this statement comes out of Downing Street at 1:30 this morning, which says the minister at the dispatch box was told mistakenly by Downing Street to say that it was not a confidence motion.
Because the chief whip is like, I can't do my job. If you've got officials in Number 10 telling the front bench minister that it's not a confidence motion, and I'm going up to MPs and telling them it is a confidence motion, how am I expected to do my job?
And as you rather beautifully explained yesterday, this isn't a matter of analysis or opinion. It became a confidence motion by dint of the Labour Party's political movement, political tactics. It didn't. No one decided it becomes a confidence motion. It becomes a confidence motion because of facts.
It was a really boring mistake that the Conservative government made, that Liz Truss made, because they have got rid of the people who don't know what they're doing and brought in people who got rid of people who know what they're doing, and they brought in people who don't know how it works. You can't simply have something like fracking that's so controversial with your own backbenchers just sitting there on the slate. And that's why Keir Starmer, he's got some really smart people working around him, right? They come in and they go, there's an opportunity here. We're going to put forward a motion to take control of the order paper and bring forward legislation banning fracking. So knowing that Conservative MPs who are in constituencies with fracking sites, potentially, people like Mark Menzies, Scott Benton, are either going to have to vote with Labour or on every single leaflet at the next general election, it's going to be your MP voted in favour of fracking.
So, arguably, people in Downing Street didn't realise the extent of the Labour Party's successful manoeuvre yesterday. I mean, it's almost impossible to come up with a reason, an explanation of how they could have muffed up, made a terrible situation even worse.
But the mistake goes before that, James, because they didn't realise the liability of leaving something like fracking just sitting there in the ether. If you're not going to get it through Commons, pull it. Say you're going to pull it. Don't let the opposition take advantage of it, because that's why you're going to get hammered.
And then what happened in the actual lobby?
So MPs go into the voting lobbies under the impression that actually they're not going to lose the whip. And then suddenly you've got people like Therese Coffey and Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I've seen some of the other photographs this morning, James. It's ugly, right?
Well, some of them aren't real. Some of them, the ones
I've seen are real.
Are they really? Can I have a look at them?
No, I haven't been sent them. I was shown them on a phone.
Oh, really? And this is robust manhandling in the lobby?
Physical, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
It's physical, and I've seen them. So,
why? Just tell people why. Why would anyone be manhandling anyone in the?
Because they're scared they're going to lose. The government's going to fall. This is the moment potentially. If the government lose the vote, having said it's a confidence motion, the government falls. It doesn't get bigger than this. The government topples if they lose a confidence motion.
But Jacob Rees-Mogg was reportedly bellowing, "This is not a confidence motion."
Yeah, and 10 seconds later he was saying it was. Jeez. So people didn't know what they were doing.
Do you see now why I'm not enjoying this? This is the party of government. This is like if there was a fight in the cockpit of an aeroplane you were flying in, and you started selling tickets and claiming that it was a great spectacle to observe. This is utterly, utterly awful.
So I've been speaking to Chris Bryant, the Labour MP, who was there, and this is what he told me.
I was standing there just about to vote myself in the other lobby, and there were maybe 15, 20 Tory MPs gathered around two, very, very close, very tightly packed. the government whips and ministers were squaring up to the two Tory MPs who were, I think, wavering as to how they were going to vote. There was shouting, there was gesticulating, pointing. There was a bit of kind of, not exactly sort of grabbing hold of somebody and throwing them through the lobby door, but
manhandling.
Well, it's the best way I can describe it is if you remember the Royal Naval Ratings in the funeral, all marching in lockstep, and so the gun carriage moved without you seeing anything happen, and that's kind of what it was like. They all just sort of slowly moved, and he had no choice but to go through into the no lobby. And of course all of this is happening because there's just complete confusion as to what the real situation was. Was it a vote of confidence or not? Did the poor Tory MPs have to vote against their constituents over fracking, or did they have to vote against the government? And all of this at a time when basically discipline has completely fallen apart in the Tory party. Now, I know there are people who are saying, well, it was just a full and frank discussion. That is code for intimidatory and bullying behaviour. Especially, we've been trying to change the culture in Parliament. You've seen there have been cases of MPs bullying their staff. People have been suspended from the House for that. Well, that happens because there's a culture of bullying and intimidation. Yeah, one of the things that we say in the behaviour code is you should be aware of your own power. So if you're a senior government minister or a whip and you have phenomenal power over somebody, you need to sit a bit lighter.
To come, more of Theo Usherwood's interviews down at the House of Commons this morning. As we head towards the news, I'll just remind you of a tweet from May of 2015. Do you remember that? It seems like a lifetime ago. Britain faces, it was a tweet by a bloke called David Cameron. Do you remember him? Britain faces a simple and inescapable choice: stability and strong government with me, or chaos with Ed Miliband. Holly Harris is here with your headlines.
The Commons Speaker has asked officials to investigate claims that some Tory MPs were manhandled in the lobby during a fracking vote last night. Ministers have denied people were trying to force others to vote on the government's side, but Sir Lindsay Hoyle says what's been reported to him is unacceptable behaviour. An 11th Conservative MP, Cheryl Murray, has called for the Prime Minister to stand down, saying her position has become untenable. Yesterday, Suella Braverman resigned as Home Secretary. Labour's been granted an urgent question in the Commons this morning on the circumstances of her departure. A woman's been stabbed inside a coffee shop in Paddington in central London this morning. The Met say members of the public intervened and a man's been arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm. The weather rather cloudy with heavy spells of rain across much of Scotland and northern and eastern England. Brighter over Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest of England. A high of 18 Celsius.
LBC.
As you can hear, Michael's hard at work selling his car. No, really, he is. Because Michael's selling his car the motorway way. You see, while you're busy having a relaxing cuppa, Motorway are busy finding the highest offer for your car, as dealers compete to give you their best price. Plus, it doesn't cost you a thing to sell, and they collect your car from home for free. To sell your car, visit motorway.co.uk.
Using my Barclaycard Forward credit card to pay for the stuff I need now could help build up my credit score for the day I need something bigger. So buying a set of headphones or weights for my workout, smashed it, could help in the future when I want to rent my first flat share. Now that's forward thinking. Check if you're eligible at barclaycard.co.uk. 33.9% APR representative variable subject to application, financial circumstances and borrowing history. T's and C's apply. Responsible use of a credit card can help build your credit score when you pay on time.
Deciding to save more by shopping at Lidl feels like... But getting the chance to win a year's worth of shopping or one of over 5,000 other prizes just by doing your weekly shop, that's like... Just scan your Lidl Plus app when you spend a minimum of £10 to get a stamp. Collect 4 and submit them on the app. Download and start saving today. 18 plus, end 2nd of November 2022. Qualifying spend excludes infant formula. Various prices available. Full T&Cs apply. See lidl.co.uk/SC.
At Laser Clinics UK, we're bringing you the future of beauty. We offer state-of-the-art laser hair removal for every skin tone and type. Ditch the razor, leave behind painful, pricey waxing, make the switch for long-lasting, smooth results. Our Big Beauty sale is on now. 50% off all laser hair removal packages. Brazilian and underarms only £24.50 per session. Go to laserclinics.co.uk for T's and C's and to book and buy online. Laser Clinics UK.
Hear that? That's what nothing sounds like, which is exactly what you'll pay for BT Broadband until 2023. It also sounds like... and just about anything else you want to do with your broadband. And then it's just $28.99 a month for month 4. And there's no setup fee either. BT Broadband. Free till 2023. Now that really does sound good, doesn't it? Hurry, offer ends 3rd of November. New customers 24-month contract, CPI plus 3.9% each March. Terms apply.
Maybe your stamps are on the table next to the birthday card you forgot to send. Or in that random drawer full of pens, pennies and paper clips. Or stuck to your fridge behind a year-old to-do list and a magnet from Malaga. Or maybe, just maybe, they're neatly placed in a completely sensible spot. After the 31st of January 2023, regular stamps without a barcode will no longer be valid. So if you know where your old ones are, use them up or swap them. For more info, visit royalmail.com/barcoded stamps.
Everything is more exciting when it's electrified. And now the Nissan Electrified lineup is here. Whether you're you'll find a Nissan to match your feeling. Search Nissan Feel Electrified and book your personalised test drive with the experts in electrification. Join us at the Feel Electrified event between October 8th and November 8th at your local Nissan dealership. Test drive subject to availability.
Paint your walls a shade that'll get your neighbours staring. At Wickes, get Dulux Standard 2.5 litre coloured emulsion was £20, now £15. Be house proud with Wickes. Terms apply.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
25 to 11 is the time. I mentioned Charles Walker, Sir Charles Walker. I mentioned him yesterday, actually, because there is a liberating heir to the man, a liberated heir to the man. He talks about the fact he's leaving at the next election and it somehow frees people. It's no great mystery, is it? He is not worried about keeping his seat, never mind getting a promotion or anything like that. He's sitting on the Privileges Committee that's looking into Boris Johnson. We'll talk about that in a moment. But he is also able to speak without fear or favour about the state of his own party.
To be perfectly honest, this whole affair is inexcusable. It is a pitiful reflection on the Conservative Parliamentary Party at every level. And it reflects really badly, obviously, on the government of the day. I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
So you seem quietly...
I'm livid. And, you know, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
I'm sorry, it's very difficult to convey. You look just furious about this.
I am. I've had enough. I've had enough of talentless people putting their tick in the right box, not because it's in the national interest, but because it's in their own personal interest to achieve ministerial position. Unless we get our act together and behave like grown-ups, I'm afraid many hundreds of my colleagues, perhaps 200, will be leaving at the behest of their electorate.
That is a Tory grandee, as we call them. That is a senior Conservative MP, knighted for his services. And it could have been me, talking about talentless people. I'd have thrown in a tyranny, just for the sake of alliteration. The tyranny of talentless people. The tyranny of talentless people. That's what it is. That's what we're living through. And he beautifully points out they've prioritised personal ambition, getting a seat around the cabinet table around. They've prioritised it above the party and, crucially, above the country, above the cost of living crisis, above the energy bills, above everything, their own personal ambitions. And if you need someone who embodies that pathetic approach to politics, then step forward your new Home Secretary, Grant Shapps. 10:38 is the time, a slightly odd programme this morning. But but you'll understand why. It's a slightly odd morning. Theo Usherwood is here.
Just talking of grant shaps, actually, there was an urgent question asked of the Home Secretary, new Home Secretary, by Yvette Cooper, Labour's shadow Home Secretary, to come to the House of Commons and explain to MPs the departure of Suella Braverman, in effect sacked by Liz Truss last night.
We should make that clear. People may not be fully across that because there was a lot of confusion yesterday. There were at least 3 plausible theories on what had happened. We're now fairly confident that Liz Truss's obvious need for higher immigration, if they're to pursue economic growth, was something that Suella Braverman, for quotes reasons end quotes, is passionately opposed to, and that became the breaking point. The story about an accidentally sent email, really just a face-saving exercise for the outgoing.
It's not the most serious offence, and it certainly wouldn't necessarily be a sacking offence. It might cause some political difficulty, but it's not a sacking offence. It's the split on immigration. How can you be a pro-growth government when you're trying to cap immigration numbers? Anyway, I digress because Brendan Clark-Smith has turned up instead of Grant Shapps to answer the urgent question. But it speaks to the fact, of course, that Grant Shapps, as the new Home Secretary, you would expect him to come to the House of Commons and address MPs as to why this has happened. The other notable, something else that is notable, is that Suella Braverman, there'd been talk that she would actually give her resignation statement in the House of Commons, and I'm told that will not happen. From the Tory MPs I've been speaking to today, James, it feels like that at the moment, whilst we may be up to 12 to publicly call for the Prime Minister to go, in actual fact, those around Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, and the more moderate, sensible members of the Cabinet actually need Liz Truss to stay in place until October the 31st so that Jeremy Hunt can write, produce, publish his medium-term fiscal plan, which covers everything from whether benefits are going to be uprated to pensions, we heard it yesterday, and where the economy goes from here. If Liz Truss goes before that point, then Jeremy Hunt's plan goes into the dustbin potentially.
Just make it stop now.
Well, it's not going to stop now.
I know it isn't, but the country is burning and they're just playing tiddlywinks with each other.
So I've been speaking to Tobias Ellwood, who is, of course, from that more moderate wing of the Conservative Party, and he told me that the PM needs to stay in place until October the 31st, and then honest conversations need to be had about her leadership with Sir Graham Brady.
We're looking rather headless chicken, and the nation wants leadership. And as you touched on, it is getting the economy right that is so critical. That's what the markets want, that's what the nation wants. So let Jeremy Hunt complete his economic plan so we know what's going to happen to pensions, to benefits, what's going to happen to interest rates for mortgages. Get that done, and then the Prime Minister should then, in my view, address the issue with the United 22 and indeed the Cabinet after that's happened about her leadership situation. So if you want to write now, if colleagues want to write to Graham Brady, absolutely put your letter in. But let's show some collective discipline of taking the debate, the argument, the discord inside. Let's let Jeremy complete his duties, but in 2 weeks' time, we have to have a very serious conversation about leadership.
And do you think in 2 weeks' time, when that moment comes, when Jeremy's done his job, when he's set out, as you say, on benefits, pensions, everything like that, do you think then actually would be the time to make that transition in number 10 to somebody who can work more cohesively alongside
on that, because I'm doing exactly what I said I should do, which is to shut up and take the debate inside. But ultimately, there isn't a process there isn't a quick fix solution. It is complicated because, of course, the rules as they were stood before involve party membership. But when the party is required, it can be brutal, it can be ruthless, and it can be resolute in providing a solution. Now, the question is, if we don't do this, then we are not only losing the opportunity to win the next general election, we might not even have a sizable, majority as an opposition.
Tobias Ellwood there, a voice of comparative reason, although Charles Walker stands apart. Well, he does for me. John's not happy. Don't praise Walker too highly, James. He talks about the damage they have done to his party. His party. He didn't mention the damage they have done to the country. Your point in your opening comments, James, they've put the party and themselves before the country. I'll give you that, John. That point stands. But I think that Charles Walker was addressing a specific set of circumstances last night and addressing it without fear or favour. We haven't got the words, have we, to describe to casual observers of British politics the scale of this mess.
No, and it's 11 days to go until that medium-term fiscal statement. And here we have a cabinet minister, a cabinet office minister, a parliamentary secretary in the House of Commons answering questions on behalf of Grant Shapps, the Home Secretary, which gives you some indication about how far things have fallen. What I think is different, what separates this crisis out from all previous crises that we've faced since the referendum to leave the European Union, even before, is that never so quickly have the fundamentals changed. That when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, you could sense Jeremy Corbyn was going to become leader of the Labour Party 3 or 4 months out during that leadership contest. When we had Brexit, we could see the way that we were heading into that leave vote in 2016. What we've had over the space of 3 or 4 very short months is this lurch to a free market, a libertarian approach to managing the economy, and then a lurch back to the austerity years of David Cameron and George Osborne. And that's never happened before. And that's why you're seeing this fracturing going right through the Conservative Party and the arguments that are being had and the meltdown that is going on right now.
Indeed, and meltdown is the correct phrase. I'm going to play that Charles Walker quote, that Charles Walker clip once more, and then we should probably turn our attention to something remotely resembling a phone-in. Remind us of Charles Walker's reputation and standing in the party.
So Sir Charles Walker, is a senior member of vice chair of the 1922 committee, which is in effect the parliamentary body which governs Conservative MPs. It's the mechanism by which you get rid of Conservative prime ministers, and he is very well regarded. He's the MP for Broxbourne. He's been an MP since, if I remember right, at least 2005. He's never served as a minister, so he's not somebody who has ever sought promotion, craved promotion, wanted to climb the greasy pole in politics, but he's somebody who is seen, I think, of the centre-right. He had some quite outspoken views about lockdown and about returning quickly after July the 19th, so-called Freedom Day, and he's highly regarded by his colleagues.
And here he is talking about those colleagues.
To be perfectly honest, this whole affair is inexcusable. It is a pitiful reflection on the Conservative Parliamentary Party at every level. And it reflects really badly, obviously, on the government of the day. I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
So you seem quietly...
I'm livid. And, you know, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
I'm sorry, it's very difficult to convey. You look just furious about this.
I am. I've had enough. I've had enough of talentless people putting their tick in the right box, not because it's in the national interest, but because it's in their own personal interest to achieve ministerial position. Unless we get our act together and behave like grown-ups, I'm afraid many hundreds of my colleagues, perhaps 200, will be leaving at the behest of their electorate.
The tyranny of the talentless. That is it, isn't it? That's post-Brexit Britain in general and post-Brexit Conservative politics.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:51 is the time. So I think there's only one question I want you to answer. I'm going to take calls from people who've already rung in, and we'll move on after 11 o'clock probably to the question I'm about to pose. I haven't decided what we're going to do yet at 12 o'clock. Obviously, the need for Mystery Hour increases according to the severity of the political mess, but the inquiry into child sexual abuse concludes today, and the results are embargoed until 12 noon. So I'm certainly going to speak to Baroness J, Alexis J, who has chaired that inquiry exclusively shortly after 12. When I say exclusive, I'm just indulging in lazy journalese. I think she's talking to us first, but she'll be talking to lots of other media outlets as well. What we do after that, I haven't yet decided. We may do a shortened Mystery Hour. We may, of course, be reporting on the collapse of the government again. It's hard to say. I think there's 12 MPs now who've publicly called for Liz Truss to go. Many, many, many more have submitted letters of no confidence to Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee. And as you will have gathered, if you weren't paying attention last night, as you will have gathered this morning from Theo Usherwood's reports and my own efforts, we're in a parlous state as a country, because this is the government. This is not the party of opposition or some fringe organisation tearing itself to shreds. It's not UKIP MEPs punching each other in Strasbourg. This is the party of government, and it is in complete and utter disarray. And that is a disaster for everybody who lives in this country, regardless of your politics, regardless of how tightly your scarf may be knotted around your neck. This is a disaster. But the question that intrigues me now, having had a good look at the rubble, at the wreckage, the question that intrigues me now is whether or not, and Charles Walker really focused my mind onto this point, this question, whether or not the Conservative Party in its current form is finished. I can't see how it comes back from this. Even with client journalists all over the place and a sycophantic and supine right-wing media, I can't see how the Conservative Party comes back from this for two reasons, or three reasons. Number one, the scale of the mess, the utter horror show that is unfolding. Whether it was inevitable or not, I believe it was. Doesn't matter. The scale of the mess is inarguable. Number two, the absence of any king across the water. You can talk about Boris Johnson if you want, but that would be jumping out of the frying pan into the fire and then back into the frying pan again. You can talk about Theresa May, but, she's despised by elements of the party. There is no unifying candidate. This is issue two. Number one, the scale of the mess. Number two, the splits in the party. There's no unifying candidate because there's no unifying ideology. There's no unity. There's several parties in one now, and these fractures, these fissures that David Cameron sought to close and fix by having a referendum have become unbridgeable, I think. So you've got the scale of the mess. You've got the strength of the splits. You've got the divisions within the party. And then number three, you've got the absence of anybody who could lead it. You've just got the tyranny of the talentless. So the scale of the mess, the depth of the division, and the tyranny of the talentless. You take those 3 points and tell me how the Conservative Party can possibly come back from this. The scale of the mess, the depth of the divisions, and the tyranny of the talentless, the absence of a plausible candidate, a plausible leader. They just had an interminable leadership election and ended up with Liz Truss. That intrigues me. We'll move on to that after 11. I'll try and squeeze in a couple of calls from people who've rung in already this morning. Let's go to John, who's in Hyams Park. John, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, it's Josh here.
Josh even. Sorry, mate. My apologies.
That's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agreed entirely with your tweet last night saying that the root cause problems can be traced back to Brexit. And just to elaborate on what you're alluding to, Brexit validated that populism can work in the UK. You can promise the country you will do everything will be rosy, and once you've got your votes, it doesn't matter on what you deliver on because you've already won the election, you've already won the referendum. It doesn't matter what you deliver on. And
it mainstreamed demonstrable lies, and the people that if you get enough people to believe a demonstrable lie, that is somehow a substitute for a functioning democracy.
Exactly, and populism has infected every aspect of the United Kingdom. For example, with the NHS, we had a government promise to build 40 new hospitals, and then they weaseled the way out of it. We have,
but carried on boasting about it, and this is where Boris Johnson and Brexit become inextricable from each other. Carried on boasting about 40 new hospitals, even as the truth was out there, even as we knew at the very, very, very best, a bunch of them were going to be refurbishments or redecorations of existing hospitals.
Yeah, exactly. And a poor economy. We can tell politicians we have the lowest GDP growth in the G7, except for Russia. And what they'll say in return is, but we have low unemployment.
That's the predicted. That's the predicted growth. The growth at the moment is actually all right because we were coming from such a low start, which again was another example of something Boris Johnson turned into something to boast about when it was in fact something to be ashamed about. I know that you I know I asked this question while you were on hold, but I am interested to know whether you think, because you've been talking brilliantly about the state of the nation, is there any way back? Because the Conservative Party has been broken by what you've just described. It's been broken by the fact that they grew fat on unkeepable promises. They achieved power on the back of demonstrable lies, and those chickens are now coming home to roost. Is there any way back for the Conservative Party? I
would honestly put it at 50-50 chance for them.
You can't do, you've got to put it at. You've got to put it at 52-48, Josh.
Well, the reason why I say that is because the Conservatives, they haven't shaken off this populism takeover.
No.
Like Liz Truss came into power because she effectively promised these tax cuts that didn't make any economic sense, and people voted for her because,
she was keeping promises that they like the sound of. I suppose her big mistake was to move it from the realms of the untestable into the absolute heart of the Treasury, the most testable government department of them all.
Exactly. So Conservatives, they are still suffering themselves from populism, ironically. They're causing their own downfall because they have just leaned too far into populism. I think the party could potentially fracture because,
Let's see what happens.
As we've heard from last night, as we heard from the Conservative MP last night, there are a very few number of MPs.
I'm not sure they've got the appetite.
Actually...
Yeah, I hear you. I'm not sure they've got the appetite for the fight. I mean, Charles Walker's on his way out. I don't know who. I mean, I can't think off the top of my head. People mention Tobias Ellwood, or they talk about Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, but these are not. I don't know quite what the word is. Politicians of great stature. That's probably not fair. They're certainly not people who could unite a party so deeply divided. Existential threat to the Conservative Party, the magnitude of the mess, the depth of the division, and the tyranny of the talentless. I think that's, apart from when Theo was here making me chuckle, that beautiful collection of words there is the first time I've smiled all morning.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
Time. G'day, James, writes Mick. You never read my texts, but I'll keep trying because I'm a stubborn old so-and-so. If you build it, Mick, they will come. I've been arguing for some time that the Tories face extinction because, 1, they have tied themselves to Brexit. 2, they have eliminated anybody who could reinvent them as a pro-EU party. Oddly enough, Tobias Ellwood is rather challenges that bit of your theory, Mick. 3, the strength of Brexit is found in older voters, brackets my own age group, who will inevitably fade away. A demographically based change towards the EU is therefore inevitable. And on a similar theme, number 4, in addition, younger people are not going to be impressed with this Tory anti-woke agenda. Add these factors to a likely heavy defeat in the next general election and they are finished as a major political force. Suits me. I'm not ready yet to go as far as Mick goes, but I'm certainly ready to ask the question, how on earth do the Conservatives come back from this? How on earth do they come back from this? It isn't just a circular firing squad now. It demands a new figure of speech. It demands a description all of its own. It's very difficult even for me to put this into words, and I am particularly verbose. For example, I've assembled a beautifully alliterative analysis of why the Conservative Party is in so much trouble. It is the magnitude of the mess. It is the depth of the division, and it is the tyranny of the talentless. Those 3 factors combine to create an existential threat to the Conservative Party. It's not a guarantee, it's not a prediction. It's merely a statement of fact that is any one of those in normal times would constitute a fairly big hole below the waterline, but possibly a hole that could be fixed. All 3 on the same vessel at the same time constitute a serious problem, a major emergency for them. I mean, possibly not for you, although I think parliamentary democracy deserves or demands some form of robust opposition. Keir Starmer's been speaking today at the TUC. We'll catch up with some of that shortly. But this notion of existential threat, and again, as ever when we're discussing matters Conservative, your loyalty to that particular banner, to that standard, makes you more interesting perhaps than those of us who march to a different beat. If you're a member or a dyed-in-the-wool voter, how on earth do you imagine the party returning from this level of mess, this depth of division, this tyranny of the talentless. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I just remind you that James Cleverly is Foreign Secretary. Alan's in Thatcham. Alan, what would you like to say?
Well, I phoned in before you put the question, so there wasn't a question. So my thought was, is it time for the British people to get on the streets? If we were in France or Italy, we would have been on the streets days ago.
Why? What would be the focal point of our collective rage?
To show our disapproval. We got no other way. There's nothing left. Keir Starmer had a good try yesterday, and it didn't work. Now, we got the Tories fighting in the lobbies. It's time.
Jostling. I don't know that I've seen evidence of fighting, but certainly jostling.
Yeah, well, whatever. It's not right. I've been retired for 15 years now.
Yeah.
And since the age of 26, I have fought for people's rights as trade union representative.
Yeah.
And I never had any meeting where we had a jostle. We never did that. The people are very... They believe in democracy.
They do, but we're not... I mean, I don't know that the circumstances would, if they were being played out in another country, a country that takes to the streets a little more readily than perhaps we do. Although it's 3 years to the day, I think, since 1 million people came down to London to plead for a second go at the Brexit referendum. So, there have been protests on the street, but I don't know that chaos in government. I think it would need to see something like when the bills start arriving or when the evictions reach a pandemic level. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if it's visceral enough yet. I don't know if just being dismayed by chaos is enough to get feet on the street, Alan.
Well, you could be right. You could be right. But I still feel it's time for the British people to do something because there's nothing else we can do.
No, there's nothing else we can do. But millions of people, there's certainly nowhere near half anymore. But don't forget that a majority of the people who voted in 2016, many of them are still under the impression that things could go brilliantly if only. Daily Telegraph comment pages today, which I often describe to you as being funnier than any comedy currently on television, has one bloke writing, Britain has blown Brexit and now it is time to leave. This is someone suggesting that it would be a good time to emigrate. There is no reason for the young and the entrepreneurial to stay. The idea that someone pro-Brexit can write about how awful things are going, it's a good time to leave the country without acknowledging that they've abolished our freedom of movement is pretty beautiful, isn't it? And David Frost has written today, Liz Truss has to go if the Tory party is to have any chance of recovering. Recovering, of course, not from Liz Truss, but from the unavoidable mess into which David Frost did more than most to plunge the party. Alan, take care. Rupert's in Bicester. Rupert, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I tried to get on a few days ago when you said is this the end for Liz Truss? And I, wanted to say then, well, it is, but it's also the end for the Tory party.
Okay.
And I'm a lifelong Tory voter. But I can't vote for the Tory party again. I think, they're going to be out of office for at least a decade.
What are they going to look like while they're out of office? That's I maybe a little bit too early to dig into these particular weeds, but I'm fascinated by what emerges from this current conflagration.
Well, I suppose a lot of the grandees, as you call them, the Tory grandees, will have to pale or fade away. They're not going to be around because they've made themselves completely unelectable. And it's not just, the sort of infighting, as people call it. It's the complete inability to work as a team. It's also the existing cabinet that have been in waiting and sort of the jostling to gain position for PM or potential PM. And it's destroying itself from within, and it has destroyed itself from within. So it's also it's a narcissism that has taken them to this point.
A sort of collective narcissism.
Yeah, even with the backbench MPs, I think they were handed this large majority and literally just thought, we can do whatever we want and there will be no consequence. And they've got that in their head up to the point of destruction. but the question for me is, who do I vote for as a lifelong Tory voter? I like Keir Starmer. I think he's very credible, but, the people that surround him, Angela Rayner, David Lammy, Jess Phillips, as a lifelong Tory, they're going to be pretty difficult for me to appeal to.
Well,
so I think
would you do me a favour?
Just don't vote.
Would you do me a favour then?
Mm-hmm.
Would you listen to my full disclosure interviews with all three of those people, with David Lammy, Angela Rayner and Jess Phillips, and then get back to me?
I will, yeah.
I mean this. I mean, you don't have to do it today. I'm sure you've got better things to do. I'm sure you're a very busy man. But it's Thursday today. Maybe next week, if you get the chance. But listen to all three of them and come back to me. And just tell. I'd love to know what you think, because you've picked randomly and coincidentally three people. David did my old one, actually, which is called Unfiltered. So just listen to Jess and Angela. Just listen to Phillips and Rayner. And then come back to me and tell me what you think. Because I am, as you will know, because you listen to this programme, I'm a great believer that lots and lots of very good people have had their brains slightly boiled by right-wing media. And I just wonder whether an hour of exposure to the reality of those two politicians would give you a different conclusion from viewing them entirely through the lens of journalism, which is what we are, of course, reduced to.
I hope so.
I do.
Sort of, for me,
I sensed that you would, actually.
Two kids in private school,
Yes.
20% will go on school fees. Where I live, it's not a bad area, but it's not a great area. So sending those kids to state school is going to be pretty tricky, in terms of what...
You're the sort of person they need to be appealing to. You are the sort of person they need to be appealing. And there's certainly no threat to private education from this incarnation of the Labour Party. So you're referring to the removal of charitable status, which, of course, is going to be the difference between some people being able to afford it and some people not. But have a listen and just let me know whether it nudges your needle at all. I'm more than happy to hear that it hasn't, by the way.
Okay, I will, and I'll give you a call next week.
I love this. I'm giving my callers homework now. This is getting ridiculous. 11:13 is the time. Rob's in Shrewsbury. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello.
Like one of your previous callers, I rang up before you answered the question, so I'll focus on the question, and then if there is time, I'll get my example in after.
Absolutely.
I think that there's a chance that they may pull through.
There must be.
And a significant chance, and I base that on if they hold out and wait for I won't say the dust to settle, the apocalyptic dust to settle, and we have to wait, God forbid, 2 years, best part of, for another general election. They shouldn't have been able to recover from COVID. They shouldn't have been able to recover from Brexit. And I know you've brilliantly illustrated all the examples. But I rang my mum up this morning.
Oh, yeah. Well done.
I do every morning, just to say hello, blah-de-blah. And my mum is a lifelong Tory voter.
Yeah.
And we've had heated arguments, really difficult discussions, because we're poles apart on politically. But, you love your mum and all of that. So occasionally I just drop it in now. Hey, how do you think your party are doing? And just wait for the sort of passive silence or whatever. And she this morning she said, well, I'm not sure the others could do any better, if I'm honest. And I don't like that calmer chap. What's his name? And I don't like that other lady. She sounds a bit common to me.
Aww.
And all that. And I'm thinking, and I say, I work in a school. Some of the books are almost as old as me in the school.
Yeah.
I spend most of my time in the department that I work repairing things that should have been thrown away years ago that are hardly fit for purpose. So I said to my mum, I said, will you do, because it's massively strained our relationship. I said, Mother, if you love your grandchildren, and I know that you do,
Hey, mate, take your time. A lot of families go through what you're going through here, and
I said,
you go on.
If you love your grandchildren, and I know that you do, I'm begging you, please don't vote for this again. Don't vote for these again.
Yeah.
And it was quiet. And I said, I want you to promise me. I said, because this is getting, it's not funny anymore. It's not funny. And she said, well, if you, I said, honestly, because I will have, real difficulty in carrying these kind of discussions on with you.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, well, I suppose so then, but, and that was probably about as good as it gets.
This is what the Starmer's stormtroopers need to get out there one mum at a time, Rob. one mum at a time.
But
I feel
on
for
a
you,
serious
mate.
note,
I know.
on a serious note, I think there is still enough people out there that this is not affecting.
Yeah, but you're looking at maybe
affecting.
20%, and half of them would probably peel off if a party even further to the right got its skates on, So I mean, obviously it's going to survive in some shape or form, but it's the question really of how different it's going to be from what we've been used to. People like your mum are profoundly important to this conversation because they will support it regardless of what's going on, unless you make an emotional intervention like that, and even then you can't be sure of what she'll do in the privacy of the ballot box.
Of course. But it's like I said to you, I rang up before you asked the question.
Oh yeah, go on.
And the analogy I would use is that, without diminishing it in any way or humouring it, you see these cartoon sketches where you've got an out of control steam train ploughing through the Midwest.
Yes.
And it's smashing through things and causing chaos, and it's going across gardens, and it's heading towards a cliff or whatever. And we look in and we see politicians and ministers. I'm not sure whether they're trying to do the job. I think they're probably firefighting at the moment.
Yeah.
But, a passenger's trying to do the crossword, somebody's trying to eat a sandwich, somebody's trying to drink some champagne, and everything's chaos and getting spilled.
Outside the train, everything is on fire, but inside the train, they're just having a bit of dinner. Yeah, you might
a bit of dinner and leaving chaos and carnage. And they all really know we can't stop this train. We don't want to stop this train, or we just can't. It's out of control. And I'm with your previous caller. If this was France or what we'd be all setting fire to bins in the street, wouldn't we?
I don't know. It's interesting that you think that as well, and you might both be right, you and Alan. But I think at the moment it depends how close to the action you are. It's just around the corner. It's in the post. The point at which it becomes personal, but for a lot of people, very quickly, I'm incredibly late for the break.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And unfortunately, the conversation finished with my mum. It goes, and this is the problem. She goes, "Hey, Strictly starting soon, on the run up to Christmas."
It's already on.
This is LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
A lot of love there for the last caller and even for his mum. Those divisions, of course, are not confined to politics. They extend deep into families and have much of their roots, as almost all of the current problems do, in that referendum of 2016. Nadine Dorries, oh my days, calling for Boris Johnson to be brought back on Twitter in the last few minutes, which is, I suppose, that's what cults do, isn't it? You just need the cult leader back, and Johnson managed to position himself as the leader of the Brexit cult, despite the fact that he would have quite happily swum in the opposite direction if he thought that was more likely to serve his own purposes. The two columns, we're back to that again, aren't we, as evidence of what a ridiculous proposal, what a ridiculous politician Boris Johnson is. And, of course, the sabotage undertaken to the Conservative Party by clinging to those lies, by inflating those nonsenses, by promising the earth is a large part of why it's falling apart around Liz Truss's ears. But is it irreparable? I don't know. I honestly don't know. There are two ways into the phone-in element of the programme today. Either answer that question or just reflect more broadly upon what we are all looking at the moment. Sam's in Bristol. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I have called before, but it was actually all the way back on Freedom Day, so still kind of got those first call in there.
Carry on.
I'm calling in. I'm a student. I'm 21.
Yeah.
I was just calling in to think, I'm not sure if the Tories are finished, because obviously we thought that Labour were finished. Well, people thought Labour finished back in the 80s, and obviously they turned that around. But I think that they're in deep, deep trouble, and it could last a long time, because I was in the school of thought that this decade was going to be their strongest, sort of votes-wise.
Yes.
The demographics getting older, and me being in and around the university crowd, there's a very, very strong anti-Tory sentiment, and I feel like there always has been that with young people, but people our age can't remember decent Tories.
There's no frame of reference to the. I mean, pre-2019, you had some good people in the House. I mean, everyone always mentions Rory Stewart, which is a little bit unfair on some of the other ones. But I mean, you know, they're not alien to you.
I just feel like austerity runs deep in the minds of people our age.
And tuition. Tuition fees has probably paled now. It's probably tailed off a bit for your age group. At 21, people 31 are still cross about tuition fees. But it was a given for your generation, wasn't it?
Definitely. I don't think that's what they're worried about. I think it's just like I said. You know, you got this old idea of a decent Tory who's prudent with the public purse, who sort of is decent conservative but not necessarily nasty, and all we've seen over the last 12 years, which is all we can remember as a generation, is austerity, 6 years of austerity, Brexit, whatever the hell Theresa May was doing, and then Boris Johnson. Do you know what I mean?
I do. That's really interesting, actually. So that idea of, and now any notion of them being, oh, you know, I'm going to make a few quid and the Conservatives will look after me. Even that's gone out of the window with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's disastrous mini-budget. That reputation, whether it's deserved or not, for fiscal responsibility or even for just feathering the nests of the already wealthy. Some of the selfish reasons for supporting the Conservatives have disappeared in the last couple of months.
It's also just total chaos at the moment. I feel like you talk a lot about footballification of politics. It's just something that I absolutely hate. I feel like that is only fueled by the fact that it is just utter chaos. I mean, I can imagine Truss has got her people running around like Malcolm Tucker trying to fix this morning in the last sort of week or two. I think even they probably think that they're at the end of the road. I can't see, there's no sensibility in the current Tory party, and I feel like that is always what the Tories have offered. I mean, you've even got to go back to Cameron saying vote for strong, sensible government with me or chaos with Ed Miliband, and that was only 6 years ago. I just feel like 7 years ago, sorry, but I just feel like that old sort of idea of sensible, strong Tory.
For your generation, it doesn't exist. So you're just listening to old fellas on the radio today talking about days that have no reference to you, no relevance to you, because you weren't around for them and you can't remember them.
Absolutely, and all I have an experience of people my own age, you know, the tofu-eating wokarati that we are, it's just people that absolutely despise the Tories, and it's not just. I don't feel like they're opposition anymore. I really do feel like they're enemy to a lot of people and to a lot of people my age. And that to me, like I said, I thought this decade would be their strongest. I thought after this decade they're going to start struggling anyway because the demographic.
I mean that is as you know, as we've touched on. I mean, traditionally the idea would be that as you get more, you lean towards the Conservatives, but that has. I mean, Rob's mum is part of the demographic you described, but it was Mick, wasn't it, in that text, who suggested that the core support is so old now that it's not going to be here for that many more elections to come.
I hear what you're saying about getting older and becoming more conservative, and funnily enough, I think this is why it's important we got a strong sort of more central Labour Party right now, because I feel like when people start to turn that little bit more, you know, away from, let's call it, you know, the far left wing. Yeah. I just feel like having a far left wing sort of Labour Party would just put a lot of people off. When people turn slightly more to the centre, I feel like that's why it's really important that we have a big political party that can sort of be a home for them, and we're not leaving all these people politically homeless.
And then representation. The more representation there is, the healthier a democracy becomes. And of course, we had 3 years, 4 years actually, of lots of people who would describe themselves as broadly centrist or leaning to the left, feeling completely unrepresented. And now it's the turn of a lot of people who would be broadly centrist or leaning to the right, who feel completely unrepresented, because the Conservative Party has nothing for them. The Conservative Party, if you like, of Charles Walker, although, of course, his voting record will be a skipfire of support for austerity and various other abominations, the broad sense that what is currently happening is utterly unconscionable is clearly one that he espouses. And Keir Starmer, speaking of the Labour Party, has been speaking to the TUC in Brighton. We will just get a little clip of that after the very latest headlines with Holly Harris. It's 34 minutes after 11. Back to the phones. And then at 11:45, we're going to turn our attention to events in Iran with the help of Omid Jalili, who will be able to provide us with an invested perspective. And then at 12, I'm going to talk to Alexis Jay, who's chaired this child sex abuse inquiry that concludes today with the publication of their report, one of the biggest investigations ever undertaken into an appalling cancer at the heart of British society for decades. I mean, just inexpressibly awful, some of the stuff unearthed by that inquiry, including at one of my own schools, actually featured. It had its own separate section. And then we'll take a view on what to do after that. At the moment, Liz Truss is still Prime Minister, so I see no reason why we shouldn't have a curtailed mystery hour. I think we'd all welcome the light relief, but I'm not making any guarantees. Raymond's in Vauxhall to steer us back to the skip fire of Conservative politics. Raymond, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hello. Hi there. I wanted to say that, I don't think, I might be sounding naive here. I'm going to, at the risk of sounding naive, I don't think it's all over for the Conservatives. And here's why I think. Yeah. I think the problem they got ultimately, as everyone can see, is the problem of personnel. Now, and we all know why that's happened, because all the insurgents, all the fringe members that would never have seen the light of day in the normal scheme of things have now risen to the top in this party. That's what's happened, and that's what happened. That's what happened to the Labour Party a few years ago, if you remember. But they were obviously in opposition, and what Keir Starmer has done is he's come in. He's shown common sense.
I just pause you there. I mean, there were good people on Jeremy Corbyn's front bench. They just didn't think that Jeremy Corbyn should have been the leader, and that was the tension. There wasn't an absence of talent, because there's quite a lot of people on the current front bench who were on the last one. But your point stands.
The leader that sets a direction for the party, or whoever is pulling the strings. Let's put it like that, because everyone's got their theories now. But what I'm saying is that with Keir Starmer came in, and anybody that wouldn't toe his line, they're gone. Anybody that's still the hangover of the Corbyn theories of the anti-Semitism that wouldn't apologise, they're gone.